This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so exception handling. Exception handling. So whenever I'm talking about exception handling over here, I'm talking about the errors being handled. Okay, so errors being handled. So first of all, error means a mistake. Okay, so error means a mistake. So we generally get exceptions are the runtime errors. What are exceptions? Exceptions are the runtime errors that are needed to be handled. Okay, what are exceptions? So exceptions are the runtime errors that are needed to be handled. Okay, so needed to be handled. Okay, so these are handled. Okay, so these are handled so that we can, okay, so we can make the program control, so we can make the these are handled so that we can make the program control not to quit from the so these are handled so that we can make the program control not to quit from the program, not to quit from the program. So what exactly happens? Okay, so happens what exactly happens what exactly happens when we get an exception, so what exactly happens when we get an exception? Okay, so what is the thing that will happen when you get an exception? Okay, so let's write the code to get the exception so that we can understand. Okay, so just right click over here and create a new package. So name this package as except pack. Except pack. Okay, so except pack, say finish. So right click here, say new uh, class. Okay, so the new class would be except demo. Okay, so except demo class. Now let me write the code with exception. Let me write the code with exception so that we'll understand what exactly happens. So now without exception. So without exception, I'll say system.out.println something like 10 plus 0. Okay, so or I'll say 10 plus 2. So 10 plus 2. So 10 plus 2, 10 minus 2, 10 divided by 2, 10 minus 2 again, and then 10 plus 2. Now, without exception, you will get the results basically. So, without exception, you will get the results. So, what are the results that have come up here? So, the results that have come up here are nothing but this. Okay, so 10 plus 2 is 12, 10 minus 2 is 8, 10 divided by 2 is 5, 10 minus 2 is 8, 10 plus 2 is 12. Okay, so in this way you are getting the uh, results. Okay, so in this way you are getting the results. Okay, so now when we are talking about this, okay, so when we are talking about this exception, so what are exceptions? I told you, so they are the runtime errors that are needed to be handled. So these are handled so that we can make the program control not to quit from the program. Okay, so here no exceptions. Without exception, all of them are quite nicely going on. Okay, now with exception, what exactly happens? Okay, so let's see. With exception, what happens? Okay, so 10 plus 0, 10 minus 0, 10 divided by 0, so 10 minus 2, 0, and 10 plus 0. Okay, so I'm writing this. Now I will run, see what happens. So 10 will get executed, fine. So here also 10 gets executed, fine. Now here in this line, you can see the exception has come. Okay, so what has come here? Exception has come. So what is this exception? Java.lang dot arithmetic exception divide by 0. Okay, so java.lang dot arithmetic exception divide by 0. So you are dividing the exception. So you are dividing the exception. Sorry, you are dividing a number by 0 means you are getting an exception. So that exception is called arithmetic exception. Arithmetic exception, where it is available? It is available in the java.lang package. Okay, so it is available in the java.lang package. So where the exception is available in this line. Okay, so what is exception? As I told you, it's a runtime error. So why I got the runtime error? Because mathematically, if you remember, you cannot divide a number by 0. You cannot divide a number by 0. So in this way you are getting a runtime error. So this is a basically a runtime error. Okay, so it's basically a runtime error. So this error will stop the flow of the program. Now these two are not giving any output. So you got only two outputs. This is not giving you any output, means the program flow is stopped. The program flow is stopped. So what an exception does basically, so the exception completely stops. Okay, so the exception completely stops the program flow. So this flow has been stopped. This flow has been stopped. So you don't get the output for this. Okay, so you don't get the output for this too. Okay, so you don't get the output for this. Why? Because exception came in here, so that exception is not allowing you to run the codes. Okay, so exception is not allowing you to run the codes. Okay, so in that way you are looking at the, so in that way you are looking at the exception. Okay, so you are looking at the exception. Okay, so what exception is doing? It is stopping the program flow exactly. Okay, now you cannot correct this error. So you cannot correct this error. So what you have to do? You have to handle the error. So you have to handle the error. So now how you will handle the error? Handle the errors. Okay, so handle the errors. Okay, so what are those errors? Runtime errors basically. So handle the errors. Okay, in Java we can handle the errors. We can handle the errors using the below keywords and blocks. Okay, so in Java we can handle the errors using the below keywords and blocks. So first one, try block. Second one, catch block. Third one, finally block. Fourth one is going to be, I'm sorry, fourth one is going to be throw keyword, and fifth one is going to be throws keyword. Okay. So first one is a try block, second one is a catch block, third one is a finally block. Okay, so this is throw keyword, and this is throws keyword. Okay, so what does a try block do? So try block, it is used for, so try block, what a try block is used for? So try block is used for developing a, so try block is used for developing a code. So try block is used for developing a code that may contain, that may contain the exceptions, that may contain the exceptions. Okay, so it is used for developing, so it is used for developing a code that may contain the exception, that may contain, it is not that it will have compulsory, it may contain the exception. Okay, so try block is used for developing a code that may contain the exception. So we may have the exception, so we may have the exception. So what we may have here, so we may have the exception. Okay, so we may have the exception. Okay, so it is used for developing a code that may contain the exception, that may contain the exception basically. Okay, right. So it is either followed by a catch block or a finally block, or a finally block. Okay, now what a catch block will do. So a catch block will get executed, a catch block will get executed. Okay, so a catch block will get executed. So whenever we are talking about a catch block here, so catch block will get executed if there is an exception. If there is an exception, so catch block will get executed if there is an exception in the try block. If there is an exception in the try block, because a catch block will get executed if there is an exception in the try block. If there is an exception, if there is no exception, it won't get executed. If there is an exception, it will get executed. It will get executed. Okay. So a catch block may may display the exception. May display the exception. So catch block may display the exception using the below three forms. Okay, so three ways I should say, three ways. Okay, so first one, printing the exception. Printing the exception. Second one, displaying the exception. Printing the exception using system dot out dot println. Okay, system dot out dot println exception. So displaying the exception using exception dot print stack trace. Okay, so print stack trace, and finally printing the message only. So printing the message only. So printing the exception message only. Printing the message exception message only using exception dot get message method. Okay, exception dot get message method. Okay, so this is the way that it goes. Okay, so then we are going to talk about printing the exception message only using system dot out dot println, this one. Okay, next we will say finally block. So finally block, so this block will get executed, this block will get executed with or without exception, or without exception being handled or not. Okay, so it does not worry about exception being handled or not. Okay, so it is going to be executed compulsory. This block will get executed with or without exception being handled or not, or I'll say irrespective. irrespective of the exception being handled or not. So irrespective of the exception being handled or not. Okay, so what does the try block do here? So try block is going to be, used for developing. So try block is going to be used for developing a code that may contain the exception. So it is either followed by a catch block or a finally block. So catch block will get executed if there is an exception in the try block. So catch block may display the exception using the below three ways. So printing the exception using system.out.println, displaying the exception using exception.print stack trace, printing the exception message only using system.out.println exception.getMessage. So finally block. So what a finally block will do? This block will get executed irrespective of the exception being handled or not. Okay, so exception being handled or not. Okay, so first we'll have the example of these three. So uh, okay, so a small note I will make it here. So a try block followed by catch, a try block followed by catch is set to handle the exception. It's set to handle the exception. Okay, so set to handle the exception, whereas a try block followed by okay, so a try block followed by a try block followed by a finally block. Uh, finally block is is not going to handle the exception. Is not going to handle the exception. Okay, so a try block followed by the catch is said to handle the exception, whereas a try block followed by the finally block is not going to handle the exception. Okay, is not going to handle the exception. So that's what the idea here. Okay, now whenever we are talking about try block, okay, so try block followed by catch is said to handle the exception, whereas a try block followed by a finally is not going to handle the exception. So here we are going to uh, talk about, okay, so we are going to talk about the exception being followed by try and catch. Okay, uh, we can also have a try followed by, so try followed by catch and then finally, a try followed by catch and then finally. Okay, so we can also have a try followed by a catch and then finally. Okay, so finally, with this the exception is handled. With this the exception is handled. Okay, so with this the exception is handled. Okay, now let's try the same. So we will put the doubtful code. So plus, minus, divided, minus and plus are there. But what is the doubtful code? Here the doubtful code is, so here the doubtful code is going to be the division one. Okay, so doubtful code is going to be the division one. So what I'll do here is I'll say try. So and I will close the try here. So try followed by the catch. Okay, so actually exception is a class. Okay, exception is a class. So exception is the parent of all the exceptions. Exception is the parent of all the exceptions. So okay, I'll tell you, I'll give you a small uh, okay, 1 second. So let me go for, yeah, So errors and exceptions, yeah, this one. So these are all the exceptions basically. Okay, so copy this. So here, so what you observe over here, so you observe a small image, so wherein you have the hierarchy. Okay, you have the hierarchy. So here you have the exception. This is the exception class. This is the exception class. Okay, this is the exception class. Okay, so exception class, and then so under the exception class you have all these exceptions. Okay, so these are known as, so these four are known as checked exceptions. So we'll talk about the checked exceptions, and this is unchecked exceptions. So I'll tell you the difference and everything. But who is the parent of all the exceptions? Exception is the parent of all the exception. Okay, exception is the parent of all the exceptions. And who is the parent of the exception here? The parent of the exception is throwable. Okay, so parent of the exception is throwable. Okay, so in that way you are looking at all the exceptions. So now in the previous example we got arithmetic exception. We got arithmetic exception. So arithmetic exception you are getting. Now we are going to handle that. Okay, so we are saying exception, so the parent of all the exceptions, parent of all the exceptions, and here I can say system.out.println e. Okay, simply I'm printing e, so you are getting the exception being handled. The exception is being handled, so you can see here the exception got handled. Okay, exception got handled. Okay, so what is the how we can say that exception is handled? Because of this. Okay, so now you are printing these two, and you are printing the exception message, and you are printing the next lines also. Okay, so you are printing the next lines also. Okay, so next lines also you are printing. Okay, so in that way you say exception is handled. Okay, exception is handled. So whenever you are looking at the exceptions being handled, okay, so exception being handled, so you can see the other lines getting executed. Okay, so the other lines getting executed. So this is the way that we have the lines getting executed after the exception also. So it was not the case when we did not handle. Okay, so this is the first way that I can do. And what is the next style? Next style is going to be e dot print stack trace. Okay, so e dot print stack trace, so where you are running, so java.lang.arithmetic exception divide by 0. So divide by 0. So you are getting complete information. So along with the line also, along with the line. Okay. So you are getting the complete information along with the line number basically. Okay. So you are getting the line number also. Okay. So you are getting the line number also. So here you are getting the line number. So line number 12. So in line number 12, you have the exception. So if there is no exception, no problem. Now, for example, if I'm saying 2, as there is no exception here, so it will go on with the flow. If there is exception, then only the catch block will get executed. Okay, so that's the point. Okay, so there is one more way also. So one more way is going to be system.out.println. So you have e dot get message. Okay, so you have e dot get message. So once you are running this, so you are getting slash by 0. Okay, so you are getting slash by 0 here because e dot get message. So getting you are getting slash by 0. Slash by 0 in the sense only the message you are getting, only the message. So in these three ways you can go for the exception handling. So try along with catch. Finally is not compulsory. Okay, so finally is not compulsory, so without finally also you can write. So here we are going for, okay, so we are going for the exception handling mechanism where we are handling the exception. Okay, so where we are handling the exception. Okay, So in that way, you are going to have the things here. Okay, so slash by 0 system.println e dot get message slash by 0 java dot line dot argument exception slash by 0. So here you are dealing with the the things. Okay, so what exactly you are trying to talk about here? So you are trying to talk about the exception being handled. So what are the three different ways? So you just printing the message, I mean the exception. You are using print stack trace, which will give you a detailed information of the exception, and you are saying e dot get message, so you are getting only the message. Okay, so you're getting only the message. Okay, so anyway you can use, but as per the industry standards, so you are going to take up this, so you are going to take up this. Okay, so in that way you are going to look at the things. Okay, so in that way you are going to look at the things. Okay, now whenever I'm talking about try and catch, so in this way you are going to have it. Okay, right. So now I will use try and finally. So try and finally. So try and finally. So when you use try and finally, the, the exception is not handled. Now, for example, if I'll say finally, okay, so finally block will execute. Okay, so I will get executed anyway. Okay, I'll get executed anyway. Okay, so now exception not handled. Exception not handled. You can see we got the exception, but the exception is unhandled. Exception is unhandled. Okay, so we have the exception unhandled. Okay, so that's a problem with the try followed by finally. So try followed by finally will not allow us to execute. Will not allow us to execute, or I should say, will not allow us to have the will not allow us to have the the handling of the exception. Will not allow us to handle the exception. So exception is never handled. Exception is never handled. So what is the proof that exception is handled? You will get these two outputs. But here you cannot see those outputs, means your exception is unhandled. Your exception is unhandled. Okay. So in that way you are looking at the things. Okay, so that's how you are dealing with the, so you are dealing with the exception. Okay, you are dealing with the exception basically. Okay, so that's the way that you are working with the try and finally. Okay, so basically generally as per the industry standard, as I told you, so you will have the catch, so you will say exception e, and you will go for, so e dot print stack trace. So e dot print stack trace. Okay, so simply run this. Now you are going to get this. Okay, so this is the way that we are going to deal with. So we are going to deal with the try, catch, and finally. So try is there followed by the catch, and then you have the finally also. So then you have the finally also. Okay, so in this way you are looking at this. Okay, so you're looking at the print stack trace, so where you're getting the information of the output, I mean of the exception, as well as you are getting this particular thing. So what is that? I will get executed anyway, which is written in the finally. So which is written in the finally. Okay, so which is written in the finally. Okay, so in that way you are going to have the things. Okay, so you are going to have the things. Okay, so that's how we are looking at try, catch, and finally. So 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 these are the things. Okay. So now when you are looking at try, catch, and finally, so generally as per the industry, as I've told you, so you will have try, catch, and finally basically. Okay. So try, catch, and finally. Okay. Now let's understand how we can deal with uh, the throw and throws. Okay, so first we'll talk about throws keyword. So what throws keyword is going to tell you? This keyword, this keyword is used for throwing the exception. Used for throwing the exception. So this keyword is used for throwing the, or I should say, okay, throw keyword. So throw keyword is used for throwing an exception, throwing the exception explicitly, throwing the exception explicitly. Okay, so how, I'll tell you. Next is throws keyword. So what is throws keyword? So throws keyword, it is used for delegating or advertising. So delegating or advertising. So throws keyword, it is used for delegating or advertising the exception. So it is used for delegating or advertising the exception to be thrown. Exception to be thrown. So it is used for delegating or advertising the exception to be thrown. Okay, exception to be thrown basically. Okay, so basic understanding here is throw keyword and the throws keyword. Okay, so throw keyword and the throws keyword. So this keyword is used for throwing the exception explicitly. So it is used for delegating or advertising the exception to be thrown. Okay, exception to be thrown basically. Okay, so that's the basic idea here. Okay, now whenever I'm talking about this delegating or advertising means you can write it in the methods. Okay, you can write it in the methods, and this you can write it in the code. Okay, now let's understand both of them. Now let's say uh, I will have a method. Okay, so I will write this in a method like say public void arith operations. Arith operations, I will write this. Okay, so now I will not use this try catch and all. Okay, system.out.println. So 10 divided by 0. Okay, so 10 divided by 0. So what exactly I am trying to say here? I am trying to say that this is going to throw the exception. Means we are in doubt. We are in doubt that this will throw an exception. This will throw an exception. Okay, so this will throw an exception. Okay, so as we are in doubt that this may throw an exception, so what is the other way? We write a try block. Okay, so we write a try block and we write the doubtful code. So that is one way. And what is this way? So this way is going to be uh, is going to say that, so I'm going to throw an exception. I'm going to throw an exception. So I'm going to throw an exception. So here, what we are doing, we are throwing an exception. We are throwing an exception. So what is this basically? So it is nothing but throwing the exception. Nothing but throwing the exception. So we are what we are doing here? We are throwing an exception. As we are throwing an exception, uh, it's better to handle this method. So it is not that you handle this one, so you can handle this method. Okay, so so what I can write here basically, right? So throws keyword delegated to be thrown, it is the responsibility of the programmer to handle this. So it is the responsibility of the programmer to handle this. Okay, so responsibility of the programmer to handle this. Okay, so to handle this, right? Okay, so it is used for delegating or advertising the exception to be thrown. It is the responsibility of the programmer to handle this. Okay, so to handle this. So how to do this, let's understand. Okay, so now throws exception. So now you are going to use this method. How you are going to use this method? Exception demo ed is equal to new exception demo, and you are going to say ed dot arith operator. So ed dot arith operator. Okay, now if you observe here, it is saying unhandled exception, you can surround with try and catch. Okay, so it is giving you suggestion basically. So it is unhandled exception, so you can go for a try and catch. You can go for a try and catch. Okay, so in this way you are going to handle the method. You are not going to handle this, you are going to handle the method only, because that method is saying that I may throw an exception. So this method is throwing that I may throw an exception. As it says I may throw an exception, so you are going to take up that and you are going to work with it. Okay, so here, so public void and operation throws exception. So 10 plus 0, 10 minus 0, 10 divided by 0 and all. So it is saying throws exception. Okay, so throws exception, so it is throwing. Otherwise I'll write this down so that it will be easy for us. Yes, so you need to handle this. Okay, right. So finally we will look at throw keyword. So what the throw keyword says, this keyword is used for throwing an exception explicitly. Okay, so one more thing that we can write here is we can we can use throws for. So we can use throws for. Okay, so it is used for delegating or applying the exception to be thrown. It is the responsibility of the programmer to handle this. So we can use throws for uh, one or more exceptions. One or more exceptions. So one or more exceptions. One or more exception means one or more exception means I can throw one or more exceptions also. Okay. So like arithmetic exception, null pointer exception. So many exceptions are there, right? So all that. Okay. Now what does throw do? Throw will throw an exception explicitly. Means now for example if I am saying, okay, so let's say int a is equal to 10 comma b is equal to 0. B is equal to 0. So now I will say if b equals to 0. Okay, so here I will say a, here I will say so a plus b, rather a plus b, a minus b. Okay, so a divided by b, so a minus b again, and a plus b. Okay, so if b equals to 0, so I will say uh, throw, throw new exception. So throw new exception, something like denominator, not denominator should not be 0. The denominator should not be 0. So it is saying throw exception, denominator should not be 0. Else, okay, so should not be 0. Else, okay, so throw new exception, denominator. Okay, so what we can do, so we can say throws exception, something else. You can put this line. So what a throw will do here, so throw will throw a new exception. So throw will throw a new exception. So what is that exception? Denominator should not be 0. Okay, so throw new exception, denominator should not be 0. Okay, so in that way you are going to work with this. Okay, so in that way you are going to work with this, right? So in that way you are saying throws exception and you are handling that also. Okay, so this is like throw. So throw new exception, so you are throwing your exception. Okay, so you are throwing your exception basically. Okay, so that's what you are going to do over here. So this is the way that we work with the throw keyword. So we work with the throw keyword. So what a throw will do? Throw will throw a new exception. Okay, so you have to write a small note here. So the note is the throw is used for. Okay, so throw is used for. So throw is used for throwing. Okay, throwing only a single. Throw is used for throwing only a single exception. Throw is used for throwing only a single exception. Throwing only a single exception. So we are throwing only single exception. Okay, so throwing only a single exception basically. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Okay, so now throw basically is used for throwing only a single exception. Single exception. So in this way, you are going to look for the things. Okay, right. So now if we want to uh, handle the exception, so these things you have to use. Okay, and one more thing I told you, exceptions fall into two categories. Okay, so two categories. One is checked exceptions, checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions. Exceptions and unchecked exceptions. So whenever I'm talking about checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions, uh, so the exceptions are going to be checked and unchecked. Okay, so the type of exceptions that are to be the type of exceptions that are to be handled at the compile time. At the compile time, they are to be handled at the compile time. Okay, they will not make the program compile. They will not make the they will not make the program compile. Okay, so they will not make the program compile. Okay, compile until the exception is handled. Until the exception is handled. If you don't handle it, it will not make you go with it. Okay, so this type of exceptions, these exceptions are thrown at the runtime. These exceptions are thrown at the runtime only. Okay, runtime only. So they will not stop the program compilation. The program, they will not stop the program compilation. Okay, so unchecked exceptions. So this type of exceptions that are to be handled at the compile time, they will not make the program compile until the exception is handled. So these exceptions are thrown at the runtime. They will not stop the program compilation. So this is the way that we look into the exception handling. Okay, so this is exception handling. In our next session, we will talk about collections, and I mean, from second May 2nd onwards, we will be going into Java 8. So for Java 8, collections is very very important. Okay, so we will work with the collections in our Java 8. So that is why it is important. So tomorrow we will be talking about the collections. Okay, so collection framework basically. Okay, so that's it from my end. Hopefully uh, you all understood. Okay, thank you so much.